For years, I always heard about the Mass Effect series. It was something I always wanted to get into, but never really had much to go off of when I thought about it. A few of my friends basically begged me to try it, and so I did. Now, 3 years later and 3 games nearly beaten, I can safely say this. I love Mass Effect. It's my favorite sci-fi series of all time, at least when it comes to video games. There's nothing I can do to really express how much I love this franchise, but I'll try to break into little tidbits, pieces, and parts why I'll probably treasure these games for the rest of my life. I've been looking forward to Legendary Edition ever since it was announced last year, and with it only being a short time away, I wanted to go back and try to at least explain why I love this franchise. And if you don't think I'm qualified, just listen to Commander Shepard himself.
I'm Commander Shepard, and Teddy on the Spot is my favorite reviewer on the Citadel. I should go.
See? You can totally trust me. I should also mention that I'm not going to be covering Andromeda in this video. I'm sorry to everyone who wanted me to talk about it, but this video is going to be focusing on the original trilogy. So I guess let's go back to the beginning and check out the game that started it all. Mass Effect was released on the Xbox 360 and PC in 2007 and was BioWare's next RPG after the critically acclaimed Star Wars Knights of the Old Republic. Taking place in the future, Mass Effect's storyline revolves around the idea that after humans traveled to Mars, we found ancient technology left behind by an extinct race of aliens known as the Protheans. Using their technology, we were able to create spacecraft, advanced weaponry and medicine, and so much more. Using devices left by the Protheans called mass relays, we were able to make contact with other alien races such as the Asari, the Quarians, the Krogan, the Solarians, etc., each with their own cultures, religious beliefs, and scientific benefits. The Asari, for example, have natural abilities called biotics, which allow them to manipulate matter. The Quarians have been basically exiled from their home planet by an artificial intelligence race they've created called the Geth, and have to wear full bodysuits to protect themselves from germs due to their immune systems being compromised. The Krogan are a race of giant dinosaur-looking warriors who got their home planet bombed in a war against the Turians, and have been infected by a genetic mutation that basically cripples their fertility and is slowly killing them off. You play as Commander Shepard, the avatar character you get to customize both visually and throughout the story based on your choices and background selections during character creation, and while these choices affect how you play the game, the main story is generally unaffected. Shepard is called to assist a fire team down on a planet called Eden Prime where he meets Saren, a Turian Spectre, which are basically intergalactic law enforcement officers, studying a strange artifact. Not long after rescuing the survivors, you uncover Saren's plot to assist the arrival of a biomechanical race known only as the Reapers, and it's your job to stop them. I realize I just spent a long time summarizing the story, but it honestly goes even deeper than that. Mass Effect lore goes way beyond just what I summarized here, and I'm trying to leave as much of it ambiguous as I can to make it so that you can experience this for yourself. The writing and story is easily the highlight of the first Mass Effect for me. The character dialogue is so good and the story is so deep and enjoyable no matter how you make it happen. On the subject of that, Mass Effect was one of the first games, along with KOTOR, to make player choice a main aspect of the gameplay. See, even though Mass Effect does have a lot of combat, one of the main aspects of gameplay that I personally find a lot more enjoyable is talking to the people in the world and just building your reputation and dossier. Mass Effect works off of a system where, depending on your choices in the game and in dialogue, you'll gain reputation in one of 2 different meters, Paragon or Renegade. Being a nice person, saving people, and generally being an upstanding soldier will build Paragon. Being an asshole, threatening and killing people, and things of that nature will build Renegade. Depending on how far you've built each meter, you'll unlock dialogue options you might not have been able to use otherwise. It could be the difference between whether a character lives or dies, so if you want to get good progress and outcomes in Mass Effect, choose the right dialogue options and build your reputation. Mass Effect doesn't look that impressive nowadays, but back in 2007, this was a serious technical achievement. The environments in this game were extremely impressive for the time, and the character models were varied and detailed. It might look like a bit of a derpy game nowadays, but for the time this game was released, it was nothing to scoff at. It should be as good a time as any to point out which version of the game I would recommend playing. Now, the game is currently on PC, Xbox 360, and PS3, with the Legendary Edition soon coming out for Xbox One, PS4, Xbox Series X and S, and PS5. And I can only speak for the performance of the 360 version. Not only that, but I'm playing this game through backwards compatibility on the Xbox Series X. Now, you might think that the game looks a little bit choppy, and I believe it's not a result of the game itself, but a result of poor optimization. This was the first game that Microsoft showed off for backwards compatibility, and it really does show its growing pains in a few ways. The emulator has been optimized so that most games run at a high compatibility, but this one was never fixed up. It really is a shame because other than that, I still think Mass Effect on the 360 still holds up for the time otherwise. The PS3 version, which was released alongside the Mass Effect Trilogy collection, apparently doesn't fare that much better, and unless you have a computer that runs on Windows XP, Vista, or 7, the best way I can recommend playing this game at the moment is on an Xbox 360 where it'll probably run best. In terms of the music and sound design, Mass Effect is fantastic. The soundtrack is amazing, the guns all sound appropriately futuristic and punchy, and the voice acting is amazing. One of my personal favorites has to be Stephen Barr as Urdnot Rex. Okay, so I've basically done nothing but praise the game up until now, and you're probably wondering what I don't like about this game. Now, like I said, the game doesn't run that well for me, but that is probably due to the platform I'm playing on, so I'm not going to knock it down for that. But what I can knock it down for is the combat, which is not entirely amazing. It definitely has a case of first game syndrome and feels rough in some areas. The combat revolves around cover-based third-person shooting, utilizing a weapon system of overheating and cooldowns, as well as squad-mate abilities. Now, it isn't all that impressive when compared to modern examples of it, but what it does have in place is variety, given that you can choose between different classes to play as at the beginning of the game, which will modify your combat abilities to a pretty decent degree. As I said, you're also given control of your squad mates, which each have different types of weapons to use, and upgrading them and yourself becomes a top priority. While this is all well and good, the cover system can be finicky at times, and given that Mass Effect was trying to tap into its inner RPG with the combat, your aiming reticle will often grow so big in combat that hitting anything becomes nigh impossible, and your bullets seemingly go through enemies at times. Grenades are also mapped to the back button on controllers, and all I have to say to that is, what the fuck? And don't even get me started on the Mako controls, they're awful. Despite my complaints with Mass Effect, it does remain a largely enjoyable game that can still have its high points here and there. The story is amazing, the characters are awesome, and the game has arguably the best RPG mechanics out of the original trilogy. If you have an Xbox 360 and like sci-fi games and RPGs, this might be something you should check out, and it will almost definitely be improved upon in Legendary Edition. But from here, we can only go up, as we now take a look at not only my favorite Mass Effect game, but also one of my favorite games of all time, Mass Effect 2. Mass Effect 2 was released on PC, Xbox 360, and PS3 in 2010, making it the first game in the series to be launched across all the main console generations at the same time, sans Nintendo. Following the story from the first game, Shepard is still in command of the Normandy after defeating Saren when it's attacked by a gigantic ship which destroys the SR-1 and kills most of the original crew, including Shepard. 2 years later, Shepard is rebuilt by an organization called Cerberus, who aren't very favorable in the public eye, and give Shepard a task. Build a crew to investigate the alien race that killed him, now known as the Collectors, who are abducting human colonies all across the galaxy. From that point on, your adventure begins as you build up another squad consisting of new and old friends as you race against time to defeat the Collectors. In terms of general story and plot, I think Mass Effect 2 beats the first game in every way possible. Not only are we given a far more threatening enemy to fight, but we're given more story beats, more alien races to interact with, and more character development for the returning characters. Every single new alien race introduced is amazing and doesn't feel out of place at all in Mass Effect's universe. Your new squad mates, most of them, are all awesome, and they all, mostly, have really interesting backstories, if you choose to do their loyalty missions. On that note, a big part of Mass Effect 2 is the loyalty missions, which involves you going to a personal mission for your squad mates to keep them in the best physical and mental state of mind for the eventual suicide mission. If you want to keep all of your squad alive, do their loyalty missions. Some of these really tug on the heartstrings and honestly made me feel really sad, with my favorite probably being Tally's, along with her being my favorite character in the franchise. As a side note, if you don't do the Paragon interruption during this mission, and anyone who's played this game will know exactly which one I'm talking about, you're a bastard. Mass Effect 2's presentation is well improved from the first game as well. On top of that, the game runs fine through backwards compatibility on the Xbox One/Xbox Series consoles, and runs even better than the first game. None of the character models have that derpy feeling anymore, and the music is still amazing. Environments are beautiful, and all of the new weapons are modeled with great attention to detail and sound just as good. The interior areas are much more detailed, and despite the fact that you have much less room on the planets to move around, most of the areas you do get to explore, with the sole exception to me being Tuchanka, are still very impressive to look at even today. The only other thing I will say is that if you don't like the color orange, you'll definitely not like this game, as there's an orange hue over many areas of the game, especially in the criminally run city of Omega and some parts of the Galactic Citadel. The voice acting continues to amaze, with some of my favorites being Steve Bloom, who's pretty much amazing in everything he's in, by the way, playing a new Krogan named Grunt, and Brandon Keener reprising his role as Garrus Vakarian. In terms of gameplay, in my opinion, Mass Effect 2 is leaps and bounds better than the first. The gameplay is similar to the first, but with many small quality of life improvements that make it so much more enjoyable. The main highlight of Mass Effect is still talking to the numerous NPCs and filling up your codex with all the different pieces of information about the universe. I didn't mention this before, but honestly, you could write entire books just with the information in the codex alone. A new addition to the game is the inclusion of Paragon and Renegade interruptions. In the middle of cutscenes and dialogue, you can press either triggers during special prompts to perform either a humane or violent action, which will also net you some bonus Paragon or Renegade points. On top of that, the shooting has been greatly improved as well. While the system for overheating weapons is gone and replaced with a form of ammo called heat sinks, ammo is abundant enough for each of the 5 weapon archetypes that you'll never really feel like you're low on ammo at any time. Bullets don't feel like they're simply missing enemies anymore, and the feeling of weapons has been greatly improved. They sound even more impactful, and you actually get a new weapon archetype in the form of heavy weapons, which is a godsend considering I really wanted that in the original game due to all the heavy enemies, and it makes this one so much easier because of its very existence. Now, as much as I love this game, and as much as it is one of my favorite games ever, there is one problem I have with Mass Effect 2, which is something that was pointed out to me by a friend of mine. Mass Effect 2 strays further away from being an RPG to a severe degree, and rather than fixing some of the problems from the first game, it decides to just strip them away. It would have been really cool to see the Mako again, but with updated controls, but we sadly wouldn't see anything like it again until 10 years later with Mass Effect Andromeda, and now with Mass Effect Legendary Edition. I guess what I'm trying to say is that while I'm thankful that irritating parts of the game were removed, I just wish that they could have tried to fix those ideas instead of throwing them away completely. Overall, though, I can't deny how much I love Mass Effect 2. The characters, the story, the writing, the gameplay, and the presentation all come together to form a game that I consider nothing less than a masterpiece. And if nothing else, I would recommend playing through the Mass Effect trilogy for this game alone. Then, 2 years later, we were greeted with the final game in the Mass Effect trilogy, Mass Effect 3. Mass Effect 3 was released in 2012 on the PC, Xbox 360, and PS3, and strangely enough later on the Wii U. I won't be talking about that version though, because apparently it's really bad, and was the conclusion of 5 years of personal storytelling for millions of players. Taking place after the events of Mass Effect 2, Shepard has been incarcerated on Earth for his involvement with Cerberus after defeating the Collectors, just in time for the Reapers to finally invade the galaxy. Escaping from Earth alongside 2 squad mates, Shepard is reinstated as a Spectre and is tasked with gathering a new crew to build a galactic alliance to fight the Reapers and save the galaxy. Mass Effect 3 is basically one giant romp of every character in the series coming together to fight the biggest threat ever facing them. It's kind of like the Avengers Endgame of the Mass Effect universe, except this game came out 7 years earlier. Despite all of this though, Mass Effect 3's story is not the best. The characters are all excellent as always, except for Jacob, because fuck him, and the writing for them is spot on as always. It's just that the story has a few giant flaws that I'll talk about later, but for now, before I do that, I want to talk about the positive aspects of Mass Effect 3. For one, this is easily the best looking game in the original Mass Effect trilogy. Character models have been improved even more, the voice acting is phenomenal as always, and the music really brings these huge battles you take part in to the forefront and gets you invested in the action even more, so nothing really bad in terms of performance here. If I could rag on anything, I'd say that it feels like Shepard has a kind of a permanent case of resting whatever face in some dialogue bits, but that's pretty much it. The orange hue from Mass Effect 2 is gone, and there's a few different times during the game where the environments really show off the beauty of 5 years of tech enhancement in games. The gameplay is actually really amazing, and for the first time in the Mass Effect series, you're given a dodge roll, which was really the only thing that I felt was lacking in Mass Effect 2's combat. Each class from the other games transfers over, as well as the general talking bits with squad mates, and the Paragon/Renegade dialogue interruptions. On top of that, Mass Effect 3 makes the combat feel as punchy as ever, and also introduced a weight system into the game. Basically how this works is that you can switch out having one of your 5 weapon archetypes, and it'll reduce the cooldown on your special abilities. While some people might not like this, I personally think that it's one of the best inclusions to Mass Effect 3, and has the potential for so many ways to approach combat, on top of having so many weapon attachments to choose from as well. You're also given an Omni Blade, which in theory sounds awesome, but I found this thing to be really weak in a lot of areas, and the wind-up and swinging time for this thing just left me open to attacks most of the time, on top of it seemingly missing enemies somehow. But now I want to get into the real meat of why I think Mass Effect 3 is a disappointing finale to an otherwise great trilogy of games. I'm going to be getting right into slight spoilers here, but I think it's important. Now, I want to point out that I do recommend Mass Effect 3, but only under very specific circumstances, and that's because Mass Effect 3 feels unfinished. Now, what do I mean by that? Well, there's a few things. For one, conversations with NPCs don't work in the same way they did in the other games, where you can talk to them at any time and then select options from the dialogue wheel. In Mass Effect 3, this will only happen during crucial story points, and the rest of the time, they'll just stand around and respond with, "Commander," or "Hello, Shepard," indefinitely, which really irritates me. Another big part is that completing Mass Effect 3 with the best ending requires that you dabble in the multiplayer. A big part of Mass Effect 3 is building up your readiness rating for the war against the Reapers. This readiness rating will only go up to 50% via single player, and the rest must be acquired by doing the multiplayer, which is simple point capture, horde defending bullshit, and it wouldn't be so bad if it wasn't such a grind to complete each sector. You can do these missions by yourself, but doing this was just a massive emergency brake on the story, and it just gets so boring! Not to mention that you can play through this multiplayer mode as several different alien races, and they're locked behind in-game loot boxes and microtransactions, which is just about the last nail in the coffin. The existence of this multiplayer mode is the sole reason why I still haven't beaten Mass Effect 3. Thankfully, the version in Legendary Edition will have balance tweaks to work without this mode, and I'm so thankful for that because it's the one thing that completely destroys the game for me. Another really big issue I have with this game is that Mass Effect 3 doesn't feel like a complete game without a few DLC packs, mainly the From Ashes and Citadel expansions, which were ones I was recommended by a friend to get. Now, Mass Effect 2 did have a few DLC packs which certainly enhanced the experience, mainly the Lair of the Shadow Broker DLC, which I highly recommend for your purchase, along with 2 DLC squad mates with their own loyalty missions. But the difference is that Mass Effect 2 still felt like a complete game without that. Mass Effect 3, by comparison, doesn't. From Ashes is crucial to the main story of Mass Effect 3 because it introduces a new squad mate in the form of Javik, who's a Prothean frozen in cryogenic sleep awoken by Shepard to help fight the Reapers. Now, Javik is absolutely one of my favorite characters in the entirety of Mass Effect, but the fact that he was Day 1 DLC and still stands as something that's borderline essential to the main plot of Mass Effect 3 is a little annoying. On top of that, there's the Citadel DLC, which expands the plot of the main story a little bit past the point of no return. It expands the relatively small area of the Citadel that you're allowed to explore, and includes a giant story that gathers all of your squad mates from before to fight an enormous threat. This DLC is fantastic, as it focuses a lot on comedy, and most of the jokes hit bullseyes. My main issue just comes from the fact that, again, this is paid DLC, and this isn't even all of the DLC Mass Effect 3 had to offer, but it was just what I bought. I just wish this thing had a bit more time in the oven, and that most of this stuff could have been added in as actual content. And no, if you're wondering, I'm not talking about the ending. I'm not going to beat a dead horse more than it needs to be beaten. Overall, while Mass Effect 3 has its faults, it still is a really solid third-person action game that has its ups and downs. But when it has its ups, it really has its ups. I would say that if you're a fan of the first 2 games, you'll likely get some enjoyment out of Mass Effect 3, but I would probably recommend waiting until Legendary Edition comes out, as the multiplayer will be removed and the DLC will be included for free. And that about wraps my thoughts up on a trilogy that has become my favorite in the sci-fi genre. While Mass Effect in general has had its high points and its lows, the highs make this franchise something that I'll be coming back to for years to come. Whether it's Mass Effect 1 for introducing me to this wonderful world, Mass Effect 2 for perfecting the franchise in my eyes, or Mass Effect 3 for concluding it until BioWare releases their next Mass Effect game, this series has offered me hours of enjoyment that I'll always look forward to coming back and playing. And with Legendary Edition coming out on May 14th, there's no better time to give this series a go, since that'll probably be the most accessible version of the games to play. The best part is that this is also just my experience with the series, and there's so many ways you can change with the story based on your choices. Mass Effect, you left your charm on me, and that's something I'll never forget. Let's just hope Legendary Edition carries across that same charm and character for a new generation of Shepard.